Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Innova's Changing Places webinar. My name's Carly, and I'm the facilitator of today's webinar on behalf of Innova Care Concepts. Before we start, unfortunately, one of our panelists, Kerry Thompson, has been involved in an accident and under doctor's orders has been unable to make it to today's webinar. We have, however, managed to get a recording of Kerry for the topics we were going to cover during our rehearsals earlier on this week. If you do have any questions for Kerry, please still feel free to submit these to us throughout the webinar, and we will be able to work with Kerry later on to answer these for you, and we'll provide those. We wish Kerry all the best and a speedy recovery. Just so you know as well, Marta, who's one of our panel, is also having a few technical difficulties with her Zoom camera, so she is joining us, but she is going to be off camera. Throughout the webinar, we would invite you to put questions to the panel as they go through and present. To do this, you can use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll pick these up throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to get through everything at the end, but we do have quite a short amount of time today, so we may not get through everything, but we will be asking any questions that we don't get through. We'll be putting those to the panel, and we'll be able to provide you with answers to those at a later date. So today's webinar will be providing you with advice about accessing the £30 million Changing Places funding pot. We'll be giving you information on regulation compliance, and the challenges of refurbishments. This will be delivered by Innova's panel of Changing Places experts in partnership with disability advocate Kerry Thompson and her colleague Marta Salamonowicz, who will be introducing you to momentarily. Obviously, Kerry isn't with us in person today. So just a little bit of background about Innova before we start. So Innova have been involved with the Changing Places campaign for over a decade now. Their goal is to enhance the quality of life of every person living or working in an environment where care is provided. Innova's friendly and passionate team focus on providing innovative and perfectly designed healthcare equipment and furniture to create environments that meet the evolving and adapting need of the care sector. Every day, Innova works with end users, carers, healthcare professionals, architects, designers, and care institutions to help enhance the quality of life of individuals who require care. So let me introduce you to the panel before we start the presentations. So first up, we have Derek Oliver. So Derek is Innova's Changing Places manager. He's responsible for supporting architect specifiers, contractors and clients to deliver registered Changing Places facilities. Derek will be discussing why Changing Places are needed, what's required, and a bit of background about the Changing Places campaign itself. Derek will also be talking us through a recent case study at Odeon Cinema to give you a real life example of the challenges of retrofitting and how these were overcome. Next up, we have Warwick Oliver. So Warwick is Innova's Changing Places consultant. He works alongside Derek, delivering architect CPDs and conducting site surveys to ensure venues have compliant Changing Places. Warwick will be discussing the latest Changing Places regulations, what key criteria needs to be considered for existing buildings to have compliant Changing Places. Then we have Kerry, who obviously, as discussed, isn't here with us today, and will be speaking in a pre-recorded video. Kerry is an award-winning lifestyle and disability blogger and a lead campaigner for the Changing Places campaign. In recognition for Kerry's work on the Changing Places and sharing her experience of living with muscular dystrophy, Kerry has just received a nomination for this year's National Diversity Awards. Through her pre-recording, she'll be providing insights on her own experience and the importance of Changing Places. And then finally, we have Marta, who is a Changing Places support officer. So Marta works alongside Kerry, and as a team, they signpost local authorities to advise, guidance and support for Changing Places following the launch of the government's £30 million Changing Places funding. Marta will be discussing the business case of Changing Places and the importance that they can have to businesses in opening the door to a new customer base. She'll also be discussing the £30 million funding pot and how you can apply. So first up, our panel will be discussing why Changing Places are needed, and I'll be handing over to Derek, who will be starting the presentation.
Thank you, Carly, and thank you to everyone that's attended this webinar today. So the first question, if you can go on to the next slide, please, Carly. Thank you. Is what are Changing Places? And this is a very good question because Changing Places have been around for 15 years, but it's only in the last few months that they've actually come into the public eye. Broadly speaking, a Changing Place is a larger space where people who require assistance to use the toilet can go to and be attended to with the help of the carers. So it's intended to be a hygienic and safe facility for people to be attended to. There's 4 defining factors of a change in place. The first one is going to be the space. Now, we're all familiar with what would be described as an accessible toilet. And if you imagine, this room needs to be 3 to 4 times larger than that. And that is specifically because you have the person who needs the care, and you have up to 2 carers or possibly parents, but you've also got larger wheelchairs, and you've also got space for all the equipment that's required in there. So space is very important. Second point is the specialist equipment that's actually installed into the room to assist with safe lifting and helping the carers to care for the disabled person. Third point is that they are required in addition to accessible toilets, so they are designed differently for a different purpose. Accessible toilets are specifically for people who've got independent use and they don't require assistance, whereas changing places are for the opposite. And fourthly, a consistent design. So it's important that somebody who's going to go into a changing place knows what the limits are, the loading limits, knows where which piece of equipment does what and where everything is. So they're laid out in a consistent and understandable manner. I just wanted to give you a bit of a background to the campaign. Kerry was going to be on to talk about her personal experiences, and the clip that we've got will cover that off. But I want to just go back into where it's come from. There's 250,000 people in the UK who are living with multiple and complex disabilities. These are the people that require assistance to be able to use the toilet. Now, historically, there's been a lot of activity, and there's been some great progress made in terms of equal rights for disabled people, specifically the accessible toilet recognition and the way it's been included in building regs extensively, and very clear how its use should be. But there was never anything put into place for those who require assisted care. So in 2006, a number of organisations came together. Now, these were people who were interested and involved in disabled campaigns. And what they wanted to do was bring into effect a standard design for a place for people to be changed, and to be able to get these installed up and down the country to make the country more open and accessible to people with these disabilities. So they set together and formed this campaign. It was mainly voluntary parent-led, parents who had children who were affected and needed these toilets. So quite a passionate and emotional campaign, and with quite a lot of success in the local areas, and being out and had many toilets installed. But also there was a direct campaign to government, which took a long time to actually come to fruition. But 15 years later, here we are, we're talking about some changes in regulations that have come about to change this whole picture. So if we can just go on to the next slide. Okay, we're showing here a timeline just to demonstrate where the campaign's come from, where it's going to. 2006 when it was established, and within 2 years we had changing places included in the British standards as a standard design. In 2012, there was quite a momentous occasion, the Olympic Games, and for the first time, changing places were installed at an Olympic or Paralympian event. So this gave a lot of publicity to the campaign, and just 5 years later, we were up to 1,000 toilets installed in the UK. Following that, there's been a lot of the activity towards the getting the government to come on board. In 2018, we had some updates to the British standards, and during 2019, a consultation. And then last year, we had the very welcome announcement that the government was going to make changes to introduce laws to introduce changing places. And also, Rishi Sunak announced a £30 million fund, which would be used to retrofit changing places into existing buildings. And this year, 2021, where we are now, September, is the month when all local councils have to submit their expression of interest. And Marta will talk us through what's required on that, but that's a very important date, is the 26th of September, because that's when all the expressions have got to be in. And then hot off the press, just yesterday's announcement that the Scottish Government has now officially stated that it's going to put 10 million towards changing places toilets in Scotland. And we know that Wales had a consultation earlier this year, so we're hoping to see something happen in Wales as well. So I think, Carly, you're going to give us something from Kerry now.
So the importance and the difference that it makes for a change in places, for me, is huge. It makes massive impact. For me to be able to go out and enjoy my life, having a change in places toilet is initial to me being able to go out. I realised very late on that I didn't have the ability to use a standard accessible toilet anymore. And I didn't know what to do. So I was spending my time either not going out or limiting my fluid intake, which would then create a health problem. I've lost hair. I've had numerous infections where I'm now being told that if I have more infections because of not being able to go to the toilet, that I will struggle now for an antibiotic to help. So these are the differences of when I say they're life-changing facilities. They are life-changing in that they make such a difference to my life that it's enabling me to be able to go out and enjoy my life.
So thank you to Kerry for that insight there and just kind of really bringing that to life for us. I'll hand over now to Marta, who is going to discuss more about the business case for changing places. Marta, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Carly. And a big thank you as well to Kerry. And as you say, we wish Kerry a very speedy recovery. Yes, definitely. The purple pounds, that term may be not known by many people, but it is actually referring to the spending power of the disabled community. And the disabled community is termed as a household in which at least one person has a disability. And as you can see from this slide, there's a significant number of people, 83% of disabled people, who are actually saying they've turned away from businesses because they haven't been welcomed by accessibility. So poor accessibility is a major issue. And it's really great, as Derek was saying, that this facility, this platform and this company is actually looking outwards towards that importance of making a difference. Now, the worth of the purple pound, currently we're looking at, it's estimated to be 274 billion to the economy. And of course, that is a significant number, but we're not dealing with numbers. We are actually dealing with people's lives. Having a change in places toilet is a life-changing element. And as well as having a disabled person using that facility, many disabled people either travel to places on their own or with their loved ones, their caregivers. So the facility can be incorporating those people who need to be part of community life right across the board. So it is really important to remember that even though the purple pound is estimated to be rising by 14% per year, really the figures are saying less than 10% of organizations have got a plan to actually access the disability market. So really to offer a great proposal to everybody, please let us all make 2021 a really great year for the purple pound, but above all, opening new doors to new communities. Thank you so much, Carly. The next slide.
Thank you, Marta. So that concludes sort of the introduction section around why changing places are needed. There have been some really interesting points there. We'll now move on to looking at changing places regulations and a bit more about this £30 million funding pot. So I'll hand over now back to Derek, who's going to discuss the latest regulations and what venues require changing places. Thank you, Derek.
So this is the exciting news that was announced back in July last year and came into force from the 1st of January this year. Essentially, it's an amendment to the Building Regulations 2010, that's the approved document M Part 2. And section 5.6 now states that at least one changing places toilet should be provided in all new public buildings that meet a certain criteria. We're going to go through that criteria in a minute. But also it does mean that buildings that are having some work done to them, a change of use or material adaptation, will also be expected to put a consideration in to include changing places in the work that they do. You can go to the next slide, please. This is the list of the venues in order, in a category order that the government has put together. And what they've done on a number of them is work to a trigger point to determine at which level they would have to start including a change in places. Now, this is based on their consultation, obviously, in the feedback they've got. So they've done some maths on the back of this. The first on the list there in the top left is shopping centres and retail parks, and they're given a floor square meterage here of 30,000, and that would pretty much apply to nearly all the shopping centres in the UK. Now, it's a good example of reading the building regulations when it says at least one. Unfortunately, it doesn't stipulate or give a density like accessible toilets have, but you'd certainly have to have a common sense approach. In a shopping centre, you wouldn't expect to find just one changing place. You'd expect to find multiple. Then retail premises is the next on the list at 2,500 square metre. And if you think the large supermarket format, this would be the type of premises that would be required under this, as well as department stores and other retail premises. Sport and leisure at 5,000 square metre would be the larger rather than the small gyms. And then we're moving on to stadiums, theme parks, zoos with a capacity of 2,000 people. So we move from a square meterage to a capacity figure. And here we're talking where you can get a number of people into one area without necessarily being in a building. So it's the entire park, if you like. Next is the places of assembly, recreation and entertainment. And again, we've got a capacity figure on this, 350 people. This is a large category. We're talking a lot of places here. We're talking anything from public worship, places of worship, to amusement arcades, art galleries, cinemas, concert halls. You think of the buildings, civic buildings, libraries. There's a lot of places that's going to actually affect going forward. And we've got the colleges and universities that we mentioned. Schools are going to be a separate announcement this year. We're still waiting to hear what they're going to say about that, but we understand it's related to the community use of schools. And then we move on to healthcare, so hospitals and primary care facilities. No trigger point set for this. That means that by default, everyone has the right to free healthcare in this country, so they should all include a changing places. The same actually applies to cemetery and crematoria buildings, which is right at the bottom of the page. Again, no trigger point. Major transport terminus and airports, train stations, etc., motorway stations. These have already started being, there's separate campaigns about this and separate funding for motorway stations. Still a lot of work to be done there. Restaurants, cafes, pubs, nightclubs. These are ones where they'll be open to the public and used for some other activity like conference or leisure. And places of worship, we've mentioned that as well. Everyone's got the right to practice their faith in this country. And so we won't want to exclude anybody from being able to attend a place of worship. So we can see it's going to have a huge impact going forwards. There's going to be a lot of changing places installed in places. And this is one aspect of it. The other side to it is the funding. Now, we have touched on it already, and a reason why it's probably known about it. Some people will be on this webinar because they're interested in it. But that's going to open up a number of existing buildings and make them available to have changing places installed in them, which is really all about the story of making the country more accessible for these people. Now, I think, Marty, you're going to talk to us some more about this, so I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you. I think
Thank you so much.
Before we get on to Marta, I think yes, we just had another word from Kerry before we pass over to you, Marta. So we'll just play this final clip from Kerry beforehand.
So the 30 million Changing Places funding came about by a group of campaigners that have been campaigning very hard for access to money to be able to provide more changing places. So when they met up with Rishi Sunak, and that is when the ball started rolling. It was a lengthy process, but we are now here, and there is now 30 million pot for local authorities to dip into to build more changing places, to make everything more accessible for people that need a changing places toilet.
Lovely. Thank you very much. As Kerry was saying, it really is a life-changing possibility to have a changing places, and the pot of money that has been offered to local governments will be making a massive difference. So how to apply for that funding? It's really planned to be as streamlined, as simple, and as clear and comprehensive as it can be for everybody in everybody's busy days that everybody shares. So the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, the MHCLG, has invited every single local authority in England to apply via one expression of interest And this is via an electronic form. You're very welcome to find that on the government website and also on the Changing Places website. And the form is to be signed off by a named officer and approved by a Section 151 officer. So again, all the details regarding the expression of interest form you'll find on those websites. And if you are wanting to have any questions answered regarding the application process, don't hesitate to turn to us. You'll find on the Changing Places website, as you'll see on the links here on the slide, on the right-hand panel, when you log onto it, you'll see the expression of interest form. It is a very clear, comprehensive form. And on our website, you'll also be guided to the prospectus. So there you'll find, again, further details about the specifications that you're meant to be following. Again, please do know that both Kerry and I and our other colleague, Kerry Davies, we are here for you every step of the way. Any question is invited and welcome. And you're very welcome to reach out to us via the email you see at the bottom of this slide, the CPT funding email. We can literally signpost you to information and guide you along this really important journey. So thank you for that. And now the next slide, please. Thank you, Carly. Thank you so much. So how is the funding going to be allocated? Again, the MHCLG are finding a very clear and comprehensive way of addressing this very important initiative. Every single local authority is going to be divided into a particular band. So that's going to reflect the number of disabled colleagues that there are within the community. And in total, that's going to amount to 40% of the application. Now, you're very welcome if you're wanting to find out what band your local authority is within. Please know that the bands start from band A, which is 40,000 to 80,000, and they then rise up to band H, which is over 140,000. So within the prospectus that you'll find on the government website and on the Changing Places website, Annex D will signpost you to all of that information, so you'll know exactly which band your local authority is held within. Now, as indicated on this slide here, the next 60% of the proposal is remaining the most important one, the number of Changing Places toilets, the new toilets that are going to be built, incorporating the funding that you are applying for. And that amasses to 25% of your application. And the next is the amount of match funding that you are wishing to put in together with your partners. And that now amounts to 10% of the application. And finally, and very, very importantly, is the quality of the proposal. And there, as Derek was mentioning, is very important to flag the locations that you're wanting to have the Changing Places toilets located within. And of course, it's important to involve the disabled community within that. And it's very important to also refer to the biggest insight document that we have on the Changing Places website, which refers to the research information for the disabled community. So again, you're very welcome to find that information on our website. Any questions, do reach out to us. Finally, the deliverability is absolutely imperative as well. So all of those sections, they might seem a lot of information to take in, they are, but please don't hesitate. We're here to help signpost you and also guide you in the directions that are necessary to have a great and successful application. Thank you so much, Carly. Handing back to you now.
Thank you, Marta. So that concludes this section around Changing Places funding. We're now going to move on to the next section, which focuses around what Changing Places need in order to be compliant and what challenges might be faced when considering retrofitting. So I'll hand over to Warwick now, who's going to be taking you through this section.
Okay, so kicking off straight away with making sure that right requirements are actually included for Changing Places. We're starting off on the key dimensions that are required to actually create that compliant space. So the biggest thing is to make sure that you have 12 square meters, which is the requirement internally for a Changing Places room. It's made up by a wall which has a 3 meter length and another one which has a 4 meter length. Thinking about hoisting systems, making sure there's enough lifting height. It's important that there's a ceiling height of 2.4 meters, which is from the finished floor level up to the finished ceiling level. And that gives enough lifting height so somebody can be hoisted safely. We've got large specialist adapted wheelchairs, which will be going into the facility and leaving as well. So it's important that they can actually access with ease through that doorway. So that's why you have to have a minimum effective clear width of 1 meter for that doorway. And then upon entering into the facility, there is what's called the maneuvering space, which is a blank area, which is 2 meters by 1.8 meters, where somebody can be maneuvered so that they can be hoisted safely from their wheelchair to the equipment. So touching on the 2 items of equipment shown there, there's the toilet and the basin. Both have a requirement to have a meter gap from the wall to the center of each item. So there's enough space down each side for the carer to access, should they need to support the disabled person from both sides. And if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we've got on the screen now is effectively a bird's eye view of what a fully compliant changing places facility looks like. And on this, you've got the 5 key items of equipment. So that's your full room covering hoist system. You may know that as a H-frame system, an I-frame system, or an XY system, but it means all of the equipment's covered and over that turning circle space as well, so people can be moved to the correct item of equipment that they need. You've then got the height adjustable bench, height adjustable basin, a privacy screen, and the closed couple peninsula toilet. And we have the next slide, please. So now looking in more depth at the actual equipment, what you'll notice straight away about the hoist system is that it has a 200 kg safe working load. Now, that is a requirement of a changing places facility to have that across every single site. Now, if you work in stone, that is 31.5 stone. And yeah, that's our AirRise 200 hoist system, which is included in these kind of facilities because of the name. It reflects what weight it can take. So that's able to take a 200 kg capacity there. And we know it needs to be installed on a H-frame system. So that's what's shown in this image here. Just a brief word on fixings. You can fasten that to a ceiling, to the structural soffit, whether that be steels or a concrete slab above, but you can also fasten to the walls. Now, if you've got a solid wall where you've got structure in it, like a masonry wall, blockwork wall, you can use a heavy duty wall bracket, which is a fixing at each end of the track. Now, in some cases, you may not have any structure in the ceiling to fasten to or within the walls. So if you've got a solid slab floor, you can use what's called a wall post system. And that takes the weight of the hoist unit and the system, and anybody that's using it at the same time, takes it down through the floor below. And yeah, 3 ways of fastening your hoist system in place. You could have the next slide, please. So a changing bench, another main item. Again, it's that 200 kg safe working load, and Derek mentioned earlier about keeping them consistent. And you can see the weight limit is kept consistent throughout the changing places facilities. You've got 2 options here. You either have a wall-mounted bench or a mobile bench. Now, both meet the requirements of a changing places facility. Both are height adjustable. Both have that same safe working load. But the beauty of a wall-mounted system is that it will fold back and actually save space when it's not in use. Over against that, a mobile one will actually move away from the wall. So it is preferred from the sense that a carer can access down both sides if that is needed. Now, the 2 images shown at the top there in the screen, they are what's called the dry change benches. And directly below that, we've got wet change benches, which are fully waterproof benches. So if you are including a shower in a changing places facility, it is very important to make sure that the changing benches that are showerproof or waterproof are used, because it becomes an infection control risk if not. Just a word on the showers quickly. They are an option in a changing places facility. But absolutely, if you're putting a changing places facility in, it is definitely worth considering putting a shower in it as well. If we can have the next slide, please. So we've got the toilet. We know it needs to be 1 meter away from the wall, but it is just a standard close couple peninsula toilet with the option of an upgrade to a wash and dry toilet if that's something the client is requesting. But there is the dock and grab rail pack as well, which that does have to contrast to the wall behind it. So that it's clearly, you can see it clearly, but you could have any colour of those grab rails, and it kind of helps to lighten the mood, if you like, in a room, that's to not make it feel so hospital-like if there is some other elements of colouring, which is always a nice thing to do. If we could have the next slide, please. Then we've got the height adjustable basin. It's an important item because you've got to have this facility is going in a public space where anybody could come and use it that needs it. So it's important that there's a flexible height there that it can cater for anybody. And also you've got people sat down in wheelchairs, as well as carers and parents that are stood up. So yeah, making it height adjustable is important. The taps have to be thermostatic TMV3 rated, and that is to stop any scalding when it's in use. Next slide, please. And then we have the privacy screen. They can be overlooked, these, but they are very important. And they have a dual use. So if somebody was using the bench and maybe a parent had to leave the facility, well, this privacy screen can be pulled around and flexed around to cover off the bench from any views outside of the facility, which is obviously a big important factor for anybody that's using that bench. But also, if there's only one carer in the facility with the disabled person, then that disabled person is fully dependent on the carer. So the carer can't leave even if they need to use the toilet. However, they can pull that privacy screen out and just give themselves a bit of privacy while they use the toilet in the changing places facility. Next slide, please. And then we have all these items here that are shown in the middle of the screen, which are used along with those main items. So they are very important. And in order to get sign off, every single one of those has to be included. And with that, I will hand back over to Marta to discuss the signage side of things in a changing places facility.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Warwick. Thank you. As Warwick was saying, it's absolutely important that changing places actually means that there are particular equipments within it. So to be compliant, the quality standard that we're following, literally from the very beginning, every changing places toilet is following the BS 8300 standard. So it is vital that literally as they start this journey to incorporating and planning your changing places toilet, don't hesitate to keep on reaching out to us, that we can all guide and signpost you to relevant information, just to make sure that as the build and design is happening, it is going to continue on the right path so that the registration can actually happen. So how to register your changing places toilet? You're very welcome to look at our changing places website. There you'll find a link to our registration. Let's say also, if you prefer to do it via PDF, we're very happy to send a PDF form to you as well. And once you are registered, and we have seen that you incorporate, as shown in Warwick's bird's eye slide, all of the equipment is there, the peninsula toilet, the height adjustable bench, the hoist. Once we are certain via your kind information plus photographic evidence as well, that everything tallies with the information, then it can be registered, and we'll be delighted to send you the Changing Places logo. Because it is an accredited logo, we can only send that to Changing Places toilets that have completed the actual BS 8300 standard. So it's absolutely critical that if there are any questions that need to be addressed, that they are ironed out beforehand. So just to say, a significant element is, yes, the Changing Places logo, but I think it's more than that. It's actually saying that everybody is welcome and that that facility is totally and fully accessible to all. Thank you so much. And back to Carly in the next slide.
Thank you, Marta. So we're just going to hand back to Warwick again, who's just going to reiterate some of the points of ensuring that Changing Places facilities have the right equipment. So back to you, Warwick.
Okay, so outside of the equipment side of things, there's other key considerations to think about while designing or creating Changing Places rooms. An obvious one, but a big one, is the anti-slip flooring. We don't want anybody slipping over and having a safety issue that way. If you've got a shower going into a changing place, that needs to be a waterproof floor, and also drainage obviously needs to be incorporated. It's important to get the right LRV and the colour contrast. So you have to have contrasting walls and floors, so there's a visible distinction there. And again, with the grab rails and the wall behind, as we mentioned earlier, needs to have a minimum of 30% contrast. There's a disabled alarm pull system. a pull cord system. It's important in case of any emergencies. There's a pull cord position next to the toilet and one at the door as well. And that's connected to an external system so it lights up and then often back to a maintenance office so that it's dealt with quickly. And then thinking about access to the actual facility is important. How is it going to be maintained? Who will be looking after opening it, whether it be a radar key, operated with a radar key, or maybe an electronic keypad, or potentially a key if it's near reception. Just thinking about what's best for the environment that it's been installed in. And then, as Martha just spoke about, there's a sign-off and registration procedure to get on that interactive changing places map, which is where we as specialist installers would come in after we've done all the design work and installed it, made sure it's all correct. And we'd go through that checklist, make sure everything's as per the standards, and send that through to the consortium. And once that's fully up and registered, that then in turn promotes the venue that's been installed at as an inclusive place, which is obviously a benefit to them. So thank you for that, and I will hand back to Carly.
Thank you, Warwick. So that concludes that section. Our final section is by the panel will just be a short introduction to a case study. I'll hand over to Derek now. He'll start to just discuss with you some of the challenges that they had at the Odeon cinema and how they overcame them. Thanks, Derek.
Good. So understandably, we are getting a lot of people coming to us and asking us about how to create changing places. And we spent some time now looking at the design aspect, the equipment, and what goes into a changing place. But there's a lot of considerations as to how you actually go about creating that space. And something that we had a lot of experience in because we operate a full turnkey service, either as main contractor or as a subcontractor. And there are things that should be considered from the start. Obviously, finding the right space is very important. Martha touched on it earlier on, but identifying somewhere, whether it's knocking through a couple of rooms to make a larger space, or whether it's creating a new space within, it's important to think about the accessibility of it. It needs to be, available for people to get to safely and securely. I appreciate it's not always going to be easy to find that ideal 4 metre by 3 metre space to form a 12 metre squared room. So, we are very open to offering help and advice in terms of laying out a room to make it work. Could be pillars, could be angle corners, could be anything. We've come across them all. There would be structural considerations. If you're going to knock walls out, you've got to think about building regulations. You might have to think about planning permission if you're doing some external changes. And if it's a heritage or listed building, then there would be other permissions to be looked for. Now, we wanted to talk about the Odeon cinema. This is a project we did last year, actually. And Odeon had requests from the customers to install changing places, and very admirably they have set to and started to do that. And this particular project is in Milton, Keynes, where Kerry is from, and it's a shame she's not on here to talk to us about it. But there were a number of challenges which had to be faced. The first one was actually finding somewhere. It's a limited amount of options, and some were occupied by some other vendors. So we had to make sure we worked around that. Business as usual had to be maintained, so no interruptions during screening time. There was structural work involved. We had to involve building control with this. And then we had a surprise of some steel work in the wall that was not on the as-built drawings, so we had to make some very rapid amendments to our plans. It had to match the decor and the environment which it was going into. So we had to come up with a number of solutions, which, if you can go to the next slide, please, Carly. So we took the role of the main contractor on the project. We took care of all the others that were involved, worked with the architect and with Odeon from the start to actually identify and locate the best location. It turned out to be a large storage cupboard, which we were able to extend to create the exact size room. Unfortunately, we had to move Ben and Jerry and their ice cream stall, but we actually, as part of the package, we built them a new stall in a new location, and they were very happy with that. But it was very important that we didn't interrupt any of the business that was going on. So we operated as an invisible contractor. So that meant we worked out of hours, and we had to ensure that there was no evidence of building works being undertaken during the day, and left a nice, neat, clean, unworking environment each time we completed the day. We had to create a new entrance directly onto the main concourse area to make sure it's fully accessible. And this is where we came across the problem with the steelwork. So we had to actually produce and install some bracing to prevent any issues with the steelwork. And then, because there was no structural elements within the ceiling that we could work with, we had to use the wall post system, which Warwick referred to, where it transfers all the load of the hoist down to the slab and just requires the walls to take the lateral restraint of the hoist. So a number of hoops we had to jump through, but in the end we had a fantastic compliant facility that's been signed off and available for use. And if Kerry was here, she'd be able to tell us what a difference that made. I don't know if Marta might give us a few words on that.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, certainly,
yes,
but I'm a very, very poor second. Because Kerry's words would have been absolutely the very best to share here. So just to say what benefits is brought to the community, it must be absolutely boundless. I understand from speaking with Kerry beforehand how she has explained that planning to go out is literally like nearly a military operation, planning where there is a changing places toilet, planning how to actually travel there, how to actually, time things as well. It's beyond comprehension how literally if changing places toilets are not located within cinemas, within retail places, within, as Derek was saying, places of worship or other parts of what we take for granted as able-bodied perhaps people, it's really life-changing. So in one word, the benefits of a changing places, as in this place, certainly in Milton Keynes and the Odeon cinema, it's brought benefits that will be, I would say, from one generation to another, because the disabled community are traveling with their carers and loved ones, and changing places is there for the long haul. So it's an absolute statement of inclusivity, accessibility, and really a positive statement that everything that we've been through from lockdown, etc., we really are building back to include everybody within communities. So in terms of the purple pound that I touched upon earlier in the presentation, having a changing places is going to include people as individuals and allow them to participate fully in every aspect of community life. Thank you, Carly. Sorry for interrupting there.
No, thank you. I think I might be on a little bit of a delay potentially. So thanks, Marta, for that. And then finally, I'm just handing back to Warwick. So Warwick's just going to mention modular changing places, using an example at the National Galleries of Scotland.
Thank you, Carly. Yes, so as Derek mentioned, you may well be asked to include a changing place in a project where there is either no space available internally, it's a listed building, you can't make any amendments to it, or potentially being asked to provide a changing place in a remote location, somewhere like a country park, and your solution could well be Innova's modular changing place, which built off-site, craned into position where it's required, and is a fully compliant changing places unit, which can be positioned as and where required. Next slide, please. And just an example of where we've done this, at the National Galleries of Scotland, which was a listed building. So we couldn't create the space. They wanted to be an inclusive venue. So solution they went with is the modular changing places unit that you can see there, and much appreciated and used by several people already, which is great. With that, I'll hand back to Carly.
Thank you, and that concludes our presentation element for this afternoon. So thank you very much to the panel. I can see that we have had quite a considerable amount of questions handed over. So unfortunately, we aren't going to be able to get through everything today. I'm aware that we have run slightly over the scheduled time, but I'd quite like to ask the panel a couple of questions now. Maybe run through a few for those of you who can stay along. So the first question I'm going to put to Derek. So Derek, can you just maybe talk us through how much it actually costs to install a changing places?
Yeah, thank you, Carly. So the changing places, you can split it into the equipment package, and then there's whatever works required to install the changing places equipment. And the package itself, it can range typically somewhere between 15 and 20,000 for the equipment that's needed. That's everything to make a compliant change in place. When it comes to carrying out the actual work required, that's very much a case-by-case scenario. Probably somewhere between 10 and 30,000 would be a typical figure for creating that space.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek. Next question is for Warwick. So is it fair to say that grab rails are optional to the wash hand basing? So the person who submitted this question has just said that they've seen registered changing places toilets with the base, some with the basin and some without.
Sorry, Carly, was that the question as to the basin or the grab rails?
Yeah, is it fair to say that the grab rails are optional to the wash hand basin is the question.
Okay, well, the short answer is no, there is, well, in normal cases anyway, 2 grab rails that are incorporated with the basin, positioned either side, left and right, a vertical, which can be used as an area to grab hold of if needed, to actually get up and use the basin. So it might well be, if you've seen one that's been registered without grab rails on it, it may be one that's done a while back, where not necessarily the same regulations that we have now were in place. So yeah, that may have been the reason why it's been registered without any grab rails on it.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Warwick. Next question is for Marta. How long does the funding application process take for local authorities?
How long? So you're very welcome to put in the application of interest by the 26th of September. So the expression of interest form, as I mentioned, on the website, and the deadline is the 26th of September.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marta. Next question is back to Derek again. So what would you say is the biggest challenge in ensuring a changing place is compliant?
Thank you, Carly. It's very important that the safe working load of the equipment is 200 kilograms. That we have seen instances where lesser SWLs are being installed, but it has to be 200 kg to be compliant. And then making sure that the screen is included. This is something that's sometimes overlooked, but it is a very important function of the room. Just in terms of the functionality, being able to have some discretion where it's available is very important. So I think those are probably the 2 key ones that spring to mind there.
Okay, great, thank you. And then back to Warwick. Are there any lighting requirements? The person who submitted this question has just pointed out that some autistic users have issues with strong lighting.
Yeah, that's a great question. Absolutely there is. While you want it to be a well-lit facility, as you say, you don't want it to be glaring because of that very aspect. And what's recommended is a minimum of 300 lux at changing bench height.
Brilliant, thanks, Warwick. I'm going to put the final question then now to Marta. I'm conscious we've sort of run over time. So just a question then around, is there still government funding for NHS Trust given the restrictions to contractors accessing sites during COVID?
As far as I'm aware, we're still waiting to hear whether there is funding available to NHS sites. It's absolutely right to be aware of this funding is separate from the NHS funding, but we're waiting to hear whether there is going to be government funding specifically for hospitals. But please, as I say, do watch this space. If there's going to be any updates, obviously we'll know of it, and please come to our website and find further information.
Brilliant, thanks, Marta.
Thanks,
so that concludes the webinar for today. Apologies for the technical issues that we had a little bit earlier on. You think after the last couple of years we would have managed to have smoothed all of those out, but thank you very much everyone for joining. If we haven't gone over your questions already, we will be providing answers with those after the webinar. Please also do feel free to email any further questions over, and we will try and get get back to them. There will be a recording made available to people who've attended the session. So we will be putting information out about that in the coming days. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel for your time and answering those questions. And yeah, and we'll hopefully see you all again soon.